Welcome back to Miss Eddie's Math Movies, where it's cute to be a square. Today's lesson is 6.6, Classifying Quadrilaterals. By the end of the lesson, you'll be able to identify special quadrilaterals based on limited information. These are the special quadrilaterals that we've talked about so far. So we've just got a broad category of all quadrilaterals, and then we get more specific. We go to parallelogram, and under parallelogram is a rectangle and rhombus. And then together, rectangle and rhombus make a square. Then on the other side, we have trapezoid, and more specifically, isosceles trapezoid. Now, one way you can kind of think about this is like any other family tree. So, for example, let's use dogs in this case. Well, we'll put animals up here. And then we can go a couple different directions, right? We could have dogs over here, and we could have cats over here. And underneath dogs, we could have a lab, we could have a collie. All right, you kind of get the idea here. So, an animal is sometimes a dog is sometimes a lab. So if you're working your way down, it's sometimes. So let's write that, I'll write that note here. If you're working down, it's sometimes. If you're working up, it's always. All right, for example, a collie is always a dog, and it's always an animal. A cat is always an animal. All right, so let's look at this follow-up, kind of using this analogy. A square is always so we're going to work our way up. A square has everything from above. It's always a rectangle, it's always a rhombus, always a parallelogram, and always, all the way up, quadrilateral. So it's a rhombus, rectangle, parallelogram, and quadrilateral. So you're working your way up, just like a collie is always a dog and always an animal. Let's look at a rectangle. A rectangle is always a parallelogram, which is always a quadrilateral. All right, so you're going to work your way up using this chart. So I want you to finish this now. Determine whether the quadrilateral is a parallelogram, trapezoid, rectangle, rhombus, or square. So what we have going on here is I see the diagonals are cutting each other in half. So the diagonals bisect. And if you remember, that's a property of a parallelogram. But can we work our way down any further? Can I get any more specific? Do I see any right angles? Do I see any sides that are equal? No, I don't see anything else. So all I can say is that it's a parallelogram. In example 2, it says, are you given enough to say this is a square? Well, I see 4 sides that are congruent. So I know it's at least a rhombus because a rhombus has 4 sides congruent. But do I know anything about the angles? I don't have any more information. I cannot conclude it's a square because I don't know if these angles are 90 or not. They may look like it, but we can't go by looks. Are you given enough information to conclude this is the special type? All right, so is this enough to say it's a square? Is this enough to say it's a rhombus? So yes or no, and then explain. Go ahead and do that now. Are you given enough information to conclude this is an isosceles trapezoid? Well, first we need to show that it is a trapezoid. So we need to show that 2 sides are parallel. And if you look, E and F are making 180. They are supplementary. So that means they are parallel. So we've got one set of parallel sides now. So that's a trapezoid. But we also have to show that these two are not parallel. we have to show that it's not a parallelogram. Since the opposite angles are not congruent, it's not a parallelogram. So it has to be a trapezoid, right? When we're coming from quadrilateral, there's only two choices. If you look back to this page, from quadrilateral, we can either go to parallelogram or trapezoid. We can't ever be both. Now we have to show it's isosceles. Well, that means two sides are the same, or in this case, the base angles are the same. And if you look, this base angle is equal to this base angle, and same thing up here. So base angles are congruent, so we know it's an isosceles trapezoid. The follow-up says describe one way to show that a quadrilateral is a given type of quadrilateral. All right, so how to show that any quadrilateral is a square? Well, one way is you have to see 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. That's one way. All right, another way is for you to see if it's a rhombus and a rectangle. It's kind of the same idea. A rhombus, you need to see 4 congruent sides, or you need to see that it's a parallelogram with perpendicular diagonals. Remember, that means 90 degrees. A rectangle, we need 4 right angles, or we need to see that it's a parallelogram with congruent diagonals. A trapezoid, we need to see 1 pair of parallel sides. That's probably the best way to do that, right? Or we have to make sure that the leg angles equal 180. For an isosceles trapezoid, we need to see that it's a trapezoid with congruent legs, or we need to see that it's a trapezoid with base angles that are equal. And parallelogram was the very first one that we learned, and we spent a whole section just talking on how to prove that a shape is a parallelogram. And if you remember, that comes straight from section 6.3. And there are 5 ways to do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I want you to go to section 6.3 and see if you can find all 5 ways to show that it is a parallelogram. So go ahead and do that now. This is M Cubed signing out.